Okay, so we're starting here on page 26, and this is Sallust talking about how great the Romans were in the good old days. And he starts with the word igitur, meaning therefore. And then he says, for such men, talibus viris, or to such men, right, it's dative case, hard work, labor, was not, so non erat, was not insolitus, unfamiliar. Non ullus locus, literally not any place, or in English we would say no place, was erat asper aut arduus, rough or steep. And in fact, I think there was a typo in the booklet before. It said arduos. That should say arduus with two U's in the middle. It's nominative singular, agreeing with locus. No armed enemy, armatus hostis, was formidulosus, was alarming. So you've got this tricolon here, right? No labor, no place, and no enemy. So, the Romans were so brave back then. And then Sallust says, virtus, virtue, or valor, or excellence, or courage, had mastered everything. Domuerat omnia, had controlled everything, something like that. But, said, the greatest contest, maximum certamen, notice the archaic spelling maximum instead of maximum, the greatest contest of glory, gloriae, genitive case, in English we would say the greatest contest for glory, was erat inter ipsos, among themselves. So, yes, they were competing with enemies, but actually they were even more competitive, just within the group of the Romans. Each man, quisque, was, and then we have, the main verb is actually at the end of the clause, really, properabat. That means was hurrying or was hastening. And the object is se. So literally each man was hastening himself. Each man was spurring himself on to, and then we get a few infinitives. Ferire hostem, to strike the enemy. Right, notice this verb, this is not the verb ferro, to carry. This is the verb ferio, to strike. So each man was hastening himself to strike the enemy, to ascendere murum, to climb a wall, and conspici, to be seen, present passive infinitive, or to be noticed, dum faceret, while he was doing such a deed, tale facinus. So they didn't just want to do great things, they wanted to be seen doing great things so that they got a great reputation. Now, a small point, which you don't need to know for the IB, but I'll mention it anyway, is faceret. Why is faceret subjunctive? It's subjunctive because this dum clause is giving us a thought. It's giving us access to a thought in the minds of these Romans, right? And their thought is, that they wanted to be seen doing such a deed. And so therefore this is called sometimes virtual, I've written it here in a comment, virtual indirect discourse or virtual indirect speech. So yes, but anyway, that doesn't matter too much. So then let's go on to the next bit. These things, eas, these things, or you could just say this, they considered putabant riches This, and then we would supply putarband again. So eam putarband, this they considered bonam famam, good fame, literally, and magnam nobilitatem, and great nobility. Okay, they were, erant, avidi laudis, that means eager, literally eager of praise. Laudis is genitive. In English, it's more natural to say they were eager for praise, or you could say for fame. And they were liberales pecuniae, literally liberal of money. We might say generous with money in more natural English. They wanted, voleband, huge glory, gloriam ingentem, and literally honorable riches, honestas divitias. In other words, they wanted honorably gained riches. They didn't just want money that they'd inherited or stolen or something like that. You know, they wanted money that they had earned fair and square. Okay, and then he says, I am able to recall possum memorare. And in fact, here, possum, we should translate it not as I can recall, but as I could recall. And we'll see why in a minute. So I could recall quibus in locis, in what places? And then the subject is the Roman people, populus Romanus, with a small band of men, part of our manu, ablative case. A manus in Latin literally means a hand, but it also has the meaning of a band of men, a group of men. So I could recall in what places the Roman people with a small band overwhelmed fouderit, literally poured, P-O-U-R-E-D, but in this case we would say something like overwhelmed. And here it's subjunctive because we're in an indirect question. Overwhelmed the maxumas copias, the very great forces of the enemy, hostium, genitive plural. Again, notice the archaic spelling maxumas for maximas. And I could also recall quas urbis. Now, urbis here is accusative plural. So in more normal Latin, this would be urbes. So which cities, munitas natura, fortified by nature, so natura is ablative here, which cities fortified by nature, they captured, caperit, and the verb is singular because the subject is the whole people, the populus, but in English it's more natural to say they captured. So which cities fortified by nature, they captured by fighting. So pugnando, that's the ablative case of the gerund, the verbal noun, by fighting. So I could tell you about those things. If, so ni here, ni, is short for nissi, which means if not or unless. So I could tell you about those things if ea res, that thing, or we might say that theme, and then ni is negative, so ni traheret means would not drag us. So if that theme were not dragging us, nos, further, longius, or we could better translate that as too far, ab incepto. Incepto is a PPP, it means the thing having been begun. So I translated incepto as undertaking. So what is Sallust saying here? He's saying, I could tell you all about these wonderful battles that the Romans fought many years ago, but that would take us too far from our main topic. That would be too big of a digression. So I could tell you about those things, but I won't. So this raises another grammatical question, which again, you don't need to know for the IB, but I'll tell you anyway. Why is it that possum here, possum, is indicative? Because if Sallust is saying, I could rather than I can, it should be subjunctive, possem. And there is actually a grammatical exception here, okay, which is that if the verb is a verb of obligation or necessity or possibility or ability, then it's better to have it in the indicative. And this is, of course, a verb of possibility. You know, so if you're in the main clause of a contrary to fact condition, a condition that is the opposite of what the real situation is, then these types of verbs can have an indicative. So that's what Sallust is doing. If you're not happy about that, if you don't quite understand that, don't worry, it's not important. So that's that sentence. And the point is, you know, Sallust isn't going to go into lots more detail about early Roman history. Okay, so let's go to, let's have a look. Let's go to page 28, which is also the beginning of chapter 8. Sed profecto. Profecto just means in fact, or something like that. But so sed profecto, but in fact. And then the subject is fortuna, fortune. Dominator. Now this is a deponent verb, dominor, which means to rule. Or to dominate. So fortune rules in omni re, in every situation, in every matter. She, Ea, and this is referring to fortune, she, and then we have two main verbs, celebrat obscuratque. She celebrates and she obscures. So the point is she makes some things famous and other things forgotten. So she publicizes and obscures cunctas res, all things, right? Cunctas is a more archaic version of omnes. So she publicizes and obscures all things ex lubidine, right? Archaic spelling for libidine. So ex lubidine means from a desire. In English, we might say on a whim, rather than magis quam ex vera, rather than from the truth, or we could say rather than based on the truth. So Sallust is saying that really, you know, why is it that some things become famous and some things don't? And he's saying it's just chance. You know, it's just the whim of fortune. You know, some things deserve to be famous and they become forgotten. Other things deserve to be forgotten and they become famous. And he now gives an example of something which should have been not that famous, but actually became very famous. And this example is the res gestae, literally the things having been done, or we could just say in English, the acts of the Athenians, Atheniensium, genitive plural, the acts of the Athenians, sicuti ego aestumo, as I estimate, or you could say as I think, in my opinion, were fuere. This is a syncopated form of fuerunt. They were satis ampliae, fairly great, and magnificent, magnificaeque, fairly great and magnificent, but verum. Nevertheless, tamen, somewhat lesser, aliquanto minores, somewhat smaller, than they are reported, quam feruntur, by fame, fama, ablative case. Feruntur literally means they are carried, but in this sense, I think it means they are reported. And in my translation, I included the verb to be here. I put they were somewhat smaller. I actually think you can remove the word were between nevertheless and somewhat, because Sallust doesn't use it in Latin and it makes sense in English without it. So Sallust is saying, yeah, okay, the Athenians did some great things, but not as great as people think. In other words, the Athenians are overrated. And why? You know, why is it that the Athenians have greater fame than they deserve? Well, Sallust is now going to explain it to us. Said, but quia, because magna ingenia, great intellects of writers, scriptorum, emerged there, provenere ibi, and provenere is a syncopated form again of provenerunt, right? So because great intellects of writers emerged there, the deeds of the Athenians, facta Atheniensium, facta is another PPP in the neuter gender, literally the having been done things of the Athenians, are celebrated, celebrantur, throughout the world, per terrarum orbem, literally throughout the circle of the lands, that means the whole world, pro maximis, as the greatest. That's another archaic spelling for maximis. So Sallust's point is, you know, the deeds of the Athenians were not that great, but because they produced these amazing writers, we think that they were greater, these people were greater than they actually were. Just a minor point here, by the way, before we finish, this phrase scriptorum magna ingenia means great intellects of writers. Now in English, it would be more natural to say the intellects of great writers. It would be more natural to put the adjective great with the writers than with the intellects. But Sallust really wants to emphasize the idea of the intellect, you know, because that's his key theme here. And therefore he uses a literary device called hypallage, 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 which is where you transfer the adjective so that instead of agreeing with the noun that it would naturally describe, it actually agrees with a different noun. And that puts emphasis on that other noun that it agrees with, in this case, ingenia. And that takes us to the end of page 28.